Bonjour, can you hear me? Is it working? Yeah. OK. Tout d'abord, je voudrais vous transmettre les salutations chaleureuses de l'Université de San Andrés en Écosse, et à vous faire part de ma joie d'être ici entre vous en Nouvelle-Calédonie. C'est la première fois que je visite la région du Pacifique et que j'ai l'occasion privilégiée d'en apprendre sur votre patrimoine culturel insulaire. Je tiens à remercier tous ceux qui ont participé à l'organisation de cette conférence, notamment l'Association des musées et des établissements patrimoniaux de Nouvelle-Calédonie, l'Université de Nouvelle-Calédonie et l'Icofom. C'est une occasion très spéciale pour l'Icofom de s'associer à nos collègues ici pour organiser une conférence pour la première fois. Et je profite de cette occasion pour féliciter ma collègue de l'Icofom, la docteure Marianne Bertin, pour sa vision, pour sa planification minutieuse, avec Marianne Tissandier, Petello, Tuilalo, et Louis Lagarde en particulier, et des autres personnes. S'il vous plaît, je vais continuer et profiter des traducteurs. Je vais continuer en anglais. C'est plus facile pour moi. Okay. So, to introduce a presentation today, I wanted to start with a song. It's a song by a singer called Fiona Mackenzie, who lives on a little island called Cana. She sings in the native Scottish language of Gaelic, and this song is from a little island called North Uist. Sorry, this is Cana, where she made the transcription of the song.
Agus mare
So, for the most part, poems and songs like this, at least in the context of Scotland and of Ireland, are written in a state of exile, carrying a message of deep longing for the home place, and many are derived from the famous Scottish clearances. These were forced evictions of tenant farmers and fishers that took place around the Highlands and Islands of Scotland in the late 18th to 19th centuries. At this time, families were displaced from the land by wealthy landowners, making way for sheep, as we saw earlier, which was becoming a more profitable form of farming at that time. And for many people, emigration was the only viable option. Now, of course, as others have written, islands have always been a place that fuels the poetic and the artistic imagination. For example, David Lowenthal writes that sur les îles, nous nous sentons tout à tour débarqués et à la dérive, magnifiques et réduites, comblées et vidées chez nous et en exil. Islands are places of imagination and of opposites, of escape, but of imprisonment, of utopia, of dystopia, of self, of community, of isolation, of connection, of margin and centre, survival, and also extinction. They've often inspired artists, poets, musicians, a famous example from Scotland being Fingal's Cave, which is a cave well known when you go inside it in a small craft. It has amazing acoustics, and it even inspired Mendelssohn as part of his The Hebrides Overture. But historically, of course, people have always been seduced to buy islands, to own them, like this advertisement, quite a recent advertisement for buying a whole island close to the mainland that would cost less than an apartment in the major city of Glasgow, where my friend Jamie lives, over here. And wanting to purchase islands or control them, people are enticed by ideas of remoteness, boundedness, beauty. And of course, as you know, around the world, this situation exacerbates the inability for Indigenous peoples to own and occupy their home place. So linked to this type of exploitation, we know that inappropriate tourism development also remains a major issue for some of the Scottish islands, not least the Isle of Skye, shown here, which hosts a highly successful eco-museum project, un projet de l'écomusée de l'île de Skye. The island's popularity has further increased owing to the filming of several high-profile movies and music videos in the landscape, most recently Harry Styles. I don't know if you know the singer, but he levitates over the landscape. I find it quite comical. Skye Eco-Museum is known as Druim na Linton in Gaelic, or Ridge of Ages in English, and it was created in 2008 by Staff and Development Trust in response to a need identified by the community to shore up against a loss of local culture and traditional language. Also, depopulation, as especially young people were leaving the island for housing and for work. The Eco-Museum has 50 iconic and legendary sites, and they're populated with interpretation panels. But when we're thinking about increasing the attractiveness of island heritage, as you know, we need to think about three main things, I would say. We need to think about augmenting it, but also maintaining it, and also sustaining it. Skye Island, if I can get this to work. Skye Island benefits from some of the most spectacular scenery in Scotland, with some of the most famous sites including the Old Man of Storr, the Carrang, which is seen here, and Kilt Rock. Today, this territory attracts around 650,000 visitors a year. About 28% of tourists are drawn from the international market, and 72% come from other parts of the United Kingdom. And the Eco-Museum has fueled the success. But of course, all this romanticism has its pitfalls. On Storr, the footfall has been so intense that owing to its designation as an area of special scientific interest and special area of conservation, new stones for the path had to be helicoptered into the site at great expense. New parking and a washroom facility also installed. So therefore, growing tourism can aid local economy, local development, but it brings risk. It can exploit traditions or cultural landscapes. It can become predatory to the detriment, one could say, of local well-being. As heritage people, we are very alert to how for communities in remote and island locations, the challenges of globalization are intensified by things like socio-political and environmental instability, lack of access to resources, depopulation, unethical development. And so we have a huge responsibility in this century to protect these spaces. Recognizing what local communities value about their cultural landscapes is what gives them their cultural distinctiveness. And this is what we want to promote, but it's also what we want to preserve for future generations. I would like to share with you a nice quote by one of the founders of the Icofom, called Sheena Gillespie, who has been interviewed at various occasions over the past 8 years. She said, can you see it? Let's see. L'essentiel de cet écomusée est de marcher aux côtés de nos concitoyens du monde et de partager la conviction que le patrimoine, c'est faire le temps quelque part, avec vos yeux et vos oreilles, votre nez et votre bouche, vos mains et vos pieds. Lorsqu'il est façonné et entretenu de génération en génération, ce patrimoine est une belle chose à entretenir et à contempler. And here she has highlighted some things that are really important to us in all of the work that we do with the University of St Andrews, not least thinking about intergenerational transmission of knowledge that's been mentioned earlier, but also thinking around different forms of sustainability and sustainable development. So if we look at the literature on sustainable development, some of these texts will be familiar to you, coming from the 1960s through to the present day. I think in common there is an awareness of limits and thinking about tipping points. There's worry about loss of biodiversity and also an ethical need then to support the planet for the next generation. And on balance, one of my preferred definitions of sustainability is this one. La nécessité d'assurer une meilleure qualité de vie pour tous, aujourd'hui et l'avenir, d'une manière juste et équitable, tout en vivant dans les limites des écosystèmes de soutien. So how does all this relate to heritage? As others have pointed out previously, contrary to the predominant discourse, heritage is absolutely crucial to sustainable development. It needs to be understood, as we learnt earlier, as both tangible and intangible, with a kind of permeable mesh of fusion between these two concepts remaining key. Between 2018 and 2021, we received Royal Society of Edinburgh funding to go out and about to remote and island communities around Scotland in a form of a roadshow. We went to 12 different places, asking them, what are your major challenges and your perceived solutions for sustainability and resilience? The results were very revealing. Heritage communities in Scotland feel underrepresented. They feel as though their voices are not being fully heard by the government or national funding and support agencies, even though they know their needs best. Moreover, when tourism is benefiting the economy, this is mainly for the hotels and tour operators, with little benefit being felt by the actual heritage organisations that are, after all, the entities, 5 minutes, okay, that are enhancing local distinctiveness and sense of place. This is a summary of the main issues noted from this project around the Scottish Highlands and Islands, and I suspect that a lot of the issues are similar for you here. I have 5 minutes left, so I want to just highlight a few things in this sense of what makes islands distinctive and what the locals are caring about. I want to highlight an initiative in Scotland, which is community buyouts. In Scotland, quite a lot of the islands have been actually bought by the community from the government, and they own it themselves, and they set up a local committee to govern the island. And it's something quite distinctive to Scotland. Cana that you saw earlier, this one is owned by the National Trust, but this is Egg, which is one of the first community buyouts, and it's very well known for its green initiatives, green energy. Also Gia, a very small island owned by the local community, and Ulva here. I know that my time is limited, but just to give an illustration of why this is important in Scotland, we can have a look at Ulva. In the 19th century, that's the pub in Ulva. In the 19th century, according to the historian James Hunter, in the 1830s, 88 crofty farmers were settled in 16 townships. But this seaweed kelp industry declined and the rental fell. The landlord took a stand against crofting, reduced the population from 500 to 150, and soon to nothing, leaving the island occupied only by the owner, his shepherds, and 2 or 3 labourers. But a number of crofters remained, and it's because of this resistance that the island has been able to regenerate itself in recent years to become this thriving community. West Harris Trust is another success story, if you will, seen here. And I'll just go past this to show Luscantara Beach. West Highland Trust is 7 acres of 7 hectares of land, including this absolutely stunning beach, which could be in the Caribbean, or maybe now that I've been in the Pacific, I could say maybe it could even be in the Pacific. But in contrast to Skye that we saw earlier, here we don't have over-tourism. The local development trust is in charge. They have wardens to educate tourists about how to look after the land. There's no Starbucks on Harris. There's no McDonald's. We're very privileged in our new project, Shared Island Stories, to be collaborating with the West Harris Trust. We have a research team on the ground who are working with us, looking at past, present, and future relationships between Scotland and the Caribbean, with a focus on islands. So just briefly, these are the research questions. Quelle collection des îles raconte des histoires inconnues de l'Empire? Quel est le rôle des comités patrimoniaux dans le développement durable? Comment les musées des communautés insulaires peuvent-ils s'associer aux ONG, aux organisations politiques et locales et aux entreprises pour agir en faveur du climat? Comment la santé et le bien-être peuvent-ils être compris en relation avec le patrimoine communautaire, les connaissances écologiques traditionnelles et la vie insulaire? Qu'importent ces nouvelles connaissances au débat sur la justice climatique, en particulier en ce qui concerne le rôle des jeunes? So we're looking into the past, digging up records of past relationships, such as this list of enslaved people found on Cana, the beautiful little island that I showed earlier. I haven't got time to show more videos, but we're making a timeline of the history of the islands in Scotland and in the Caribbean. And then in terms of the present, of course, we're looking at what initiatives heritage organisations are doing. And one of the important strands to be emerging is the history of boat building, but also intangible cultural heritage around the use of boats. So these boats are built by the eye, without design, by local boat builders. And one of the things we're doing is looking at the ways in which this knowledge is being passed on to the next generation, be it informally or formally through programmes. Hold on, needs to pass. So linked to this, people often talk about green space, about going out and walking in the hillside. And Skye, as you saw, was beautiful for that. But in an interview in 2016, it was revealed that, in fact, most people don't walk in the landscape. There's a big problem with alcoholism, with obesity, as there is throughout Scotland, indeed. And so one of the strands of the research is thinking about blue space. So it's been proven that if you live within 5 kilometres of the sea, you experience better health and well-being. And this is one of the things that we're looking into. And a case study for this is out in Orkney Island in the north of Scotland. I've got to wrap up. But finally, I have to give just a quick summary of the future aspect of the project. My colleague Jamie will be running the youth workshop this week, but we are running an exchange at the moment between Harris in Scotland that you saw and Barbados. And the young people are exploring their history and their culture, and underwater as well as above water, working with the Sustainable Development Goals, intergenerational transmission of knowledge, a sneaky beach picnic to decompress. And then, yes, we will be having a conference on this theme in June, and I hope that you will all come. I have a 1-minute video on that, if I'm allowed the time. Okay, I'm allowed. Here we go. C'est le juin. J'espère vous voir en Écosse en juin. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Karen. Thanks very much, Karen. For us, it's so exotic. For us, living in the Pacific, like it's the paragon of exotism, and it's so, yeah. Do we have any questions in the room? Est-ce que quelqu'un a une question dans la salle?
So during the whole presentation, you were talking about tourism, and I was just... Yeah, okay. So during the whole presentation, you were talking about tourism, and I was wondering, because you're also really focused on ecology. So I was wondering, how do you manage to have so much tourism and you try to have something really ecological? So the infrastructure around the tourism, how do you manage it?
So the Eco Museum in Skye is the best example of that. They got a lot of money to develop an Eco Musée, but then the footfall got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was destroying the infrastructure. Because the government has designated it as an area of special scientific interest and conservation area, there was an obligation to protect it. And so they've reinforced the paths, bringing stones in from the helicopters. And also a loo was very important because, you know, people were making a mess of the place. So the Eco Museum's funding has focused on two main things since it began. One is increasing community participation, and the other is physical infrastructure to support the level of tourism. So they're very conscious of that, and there are national regulations in place to help protect. Yeah.